Thank you. So I think as I go through my presentation, you'll see I'm going to be coming at this from a slightly different angle. We're a company where we're focused on the Internet of Things. And so we're not just looking at the big pieces of equipment, but we're looking down to the individual tools and assets you may have that your folks are using. I think you'll find, though, our industry's gone through some parallels to what we've been talking about earlier today, where we've gone from disconnected systems and brought them into more IT and internet connected and started to use the cloud. See if I hit the right button. There was one I was told was the button of doom, so I'm going to try not to hit that. So a little bit about me. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Apex Supply Chain Technologies. I've been involved in supply chain consulting, technology consulting. The coolest project I ever got to work on was United Launch Alliance. That was the group where we cut out the rockets, for the rocket solutions from Boeing and from Lockheed and created the new thing, United Launch Alliance. And if you've ever tried to move a computer that's older than anybody on the team, I've got some stories to share with you. And currently I'm focused on research and development and what are our new products and what are the future things we're going to do. A little bit about Apex. We're a 10-year-old company, but with 25 years of history, 25 plus years of history. Our CEO created the first company in this space in about 1990. Many of us have been in and out of this space at Apex since then. So we've taken these systems from being separate data islands, being separate systems in the factory where they were connected by RS-45, and you had to go to each system to get the data, to being modern cloud-connected systems. So what do I mean by resist to comply? As we put these solutions in, as you put smart systems into your factory, you have some different tools to work with the employees now, or to work with the teams and the staff and the devices. Now you can start to introduce friction and control in ways you couldn't do before. Previously, if you're reporting on data, you can only react to it as fast as someone tells you that there's a problem. If the systems are looking at it automatically and they're able to start to make their own decisions, now the system can start to put some of that control in and give you visibility to things you didn't have before. So it becomes a new tool and a new way you have to look at it. It's one of the interesting things when we go in, people will have a process and they'll say, this is the way we do it. You go, but wait a minute, if we change this, and it may deliberately make it harder or easier for somebody to do something, now you can control the compliance with that process. So everybody thinks about, let's remove all the friction, let's remove all the resistance in it. Sometimes you want to keep that as a tool to make sure that you're making the right decision. So a little bit about our journey to, whether you call it Industry 4.0 or the connected factory. So when our system started in the early 90s, everything was connected by RS-45. You had to run miles and miles of wire, completely separate from the company's other infrastructure. We'd go to a server, which maybe somebody would get reports from. That's pretty good if you're in one plant and you want to see it at one place. But then if you've got different systems in, now the question is, how do I start to merge the data from those? And then if I start to go to multiple plants, how do I start to get the data from those? So our journey was to start to, back in 2006, we called them internet appliances, but make these machines internet connected. So these things are now talking to the internet, using early cloud-based technology at that point. And then starting to look at how do we automate the decision making from those, but also integrate the data. So we were pulling data from our systems, and more recently we started to pull in data from other systems. So when we start to talk about convergence, people want to know not just what did our device dispense, but also, was that person on the shift? Were they supposed to be active? Were they qualified to use the tool? And they may pull other data in. They may want to pull data from that machine, from the factory itself, in to start to make better decisions and automated decisions on it. And that automation is a key thing for what we do. I'm going to talk about the devices for a second, because this gets to really where that resistance comes in. This also gets to my point. We look at a layer below, where everyone today has been talking about their manufacturing equipment, their process-based equipment. So now you're talking about your generator, or your, in the case of the previous one, about their micro mill and the material that's going through that. That's a big item. But there's all these other items you need to make sure that you're in calibration or in compliance with your process, or that you have the right available assets to make sure those pieces of equipment are working. And today, those are mostly tracked by a person, or maybe there's an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe there's a piece of digital software on it that's tracking it, but it's still a fairly manual process. So we started to look at it and go, how do you physically control and track those items without having to put a tag on every one? RFID is a great solution, but you can't always put a tag on everything. There may not be a way to put it. It may not be reasonable to put on every piece of equipment in your facility. So we started to build devices that are doing that control on its own, and these are cloud connected. So when you look at it, when I talk about a high friction device, let's see if the laser button works, that's what I would refer to as high friction. There I can control who can get an item, when they can get it, how many they can get. So as I look at that, now I can start to say you can only have 5 items per shift, so I can start to control their efficiency. Or if I have an asset and I've got it in one of the lockers, so let's say I've got let's see the laser work there. If we look at one of the lockers, I may have a tool that I'm using to monitor my process. It might be a micrometer, it might be a torque wrench that needs to be certified, might be some kind of temperature meter that needs to be in spec, so that way when I'm doing my ISO process, that it can be validated, or in some cases it might be regulated by the industry that these tools have to be in calibration and I've got to be able to prove where they are. If I can't prove where they are, now I've got a problem where somebody can come in, they can audit me and say, well, these three things went through your system and we're going to fine you because we didn't track that. We've seen that in aerospace in particular. So now we have a way to control who's getting it, when they get it, and get visibility to that. And we don't have to modify the items that people are using within it. So as we look at one of our customers, this is a company called Oakley Die. So they're an injection molding company. When we started working with them, they had a manual process. They had a manual process where for them, because they're doing very precise injection molds, they had to certify all of their micrometers and other tools and gauges that they were using on the devices, on their molds. And they were doing it with the paper process. And in order to maintain their compliance, what they were doing was they were bulk certifying everything. So they would take all those items, they would send them out once a quarter, get them recertified, bring them back in, which works, but it's very costly and it creates some risks because you don't know if in the meantime something got dropped or brought out of spec. So when we started working with them, we started to bring the automated solution in. So they didn't have to change any of the existing tools or anything they used. But they did have to change their process. So we did have to enroll all their employees in the system. We did have to set up rules so you could control who can get it and when they can get it. But the other thing it let us do is start to build the idea of loan periods. So you could check something out, you know somebody had it for a certain amount of time, you know when they returned it. So now you don't have missing tools. I don't know about any of you. I hate it when I go on one of my factory floors and I'm looking for a part or looking for a tool. And the question is, well, I think Bob has it. Nobody here is named Bob. But you got to go find it. You spend 20, 30 minutes trying to find a tool. That's a problem. People don't think about it, but it's a lot of waste. So this helps you know who has it and when they have it. The other thing it lets you do is automate alerts. So we can automate if somebody had it out for too long. But we can also start to track if somebody drops a tool or says it's out of calibration and they return it, now you can alert somebody right away. So now they can react to that. So this is all cloud-based. So this can happen for one plant, for 10 plants, for one device within a factory. So then you can control where that automation and information goes. Does it go back to the individual facility? Does it go back to a central location to do that? And then we can start to track this towards jobs. So as we look at in injection molding, it's nice to be able to track it to a job because that's a cost factor. But if I go back to aerospace where we've done a lot of this for FOD control, if I've got a tool where it's out of calibration or I can't find it, I can be fined per an airframe per a day that tool is either missing or out of spec. Doesn't sound that bad until you do that over a quarter. That can be a pretty ugly number. And then it also makes sure that we know if the tools haven't been used, we don't have to go recertify them. This becomes part of the chain of custody idea. So now we know that the tool was put into the device. We know when somebody took it out, if they took it out, and if they didn't, then it counts as bonded storage, so you don't have to recertify in the case of this particular ISO process. So our customer is able to get ISO certified with this, and the ISO auditors actually were very interested in how we were doing this to be able to figure out more efficient processes that they could take as best practices. The other thing we were able to do was eliminate some of the downtime when people couldn't find the tools. I think I've actually talked about most of this. So I think the biggest thing here, the takeaway from this, like I covered most of it on the last one, was that there wasn't an option for the workers not to comply anymore. Because what we find in a lot of cases, when we're working with processes, there's almost always a back door to these processes. If there's people involved, there's almost always a way around it. As soon as I put a device in, There is not a way for them to physically avoid the control and the data collection that we're doing. And that's an important thing because we see some people want to actually put two solutions in where they've got one as their old process, they want to keep a backup, and one is automated. And what we find is that people always go the easiest route. So I think as you're bringing technology and Internet of Things and you're looking at this and you're bringing in these kind of smart solutions, you've got to really think about how do I drive compliance to what the new solution is and not give people a way to find a way around it where they're going to void the system in the sense that you're going to lose your data, you're going to lose your control, lose your visibility, which are the primary reasons you're putting it in. Excuse me. So, as we think about this, that we play in a number of different spaces. I've been talking about mostly about asset management, but I think anything where we're looking at it is how do we make these items smart without having to put individual tags or modify the items on it? How do we get it to that last inch? So it's important, and it's for most places critical to get their large infrastructure under smart control with smart visibility. But how do I push that down further so now I'm not having to worry about the individual tools or assets that are still part of that system that are important, but it's very much harder to get visibility on. How do I drive that compliance? And so now I'm not tracking down throwing people at something to keep the norm, but actually focusing on managing the exceptions. And then what's important to track or make sure is available? I've spoken about asset management. One of the other things that we're seeing more and more is the use of these to track critical parts or critical spares. So now you may have your facility and you've got your process, you've got whether it's your spare PLC or your spare sensors or your spare control system, or even larger parts of your factory automation. How do you keep that on hand? So that way when something is going down, so if you get that preemptive alert to say that bearing might be going out, that now I can get this notification ahead of time. I've already got one there. I can get that swapped out if you have the ability to do that, and then not have to have a part overnight or not have to wait for a part because it was already in place. That's one of the things that we're seeing a lot more focus on. And I think the last thing is what would happen if you had this visibility across all your facilities? Because as you start to make these intelligent, you start to aggregate this data. Now you're not looking across one facility. I'm looking across all my facilities in North America. Are they complying with best practices that the organization has set? Are we seeing the same patterns? We've seen some cases where what you'll find is that one plant or one group is doing something that is making them more efficient, but because that data is siloed, you can't roll that across all the other facilities. We've seen that where we've also detected problems they're using a tool or they're seeing a higher damage rate on returned items. So now you can start to go in and drill down and investigate to that facility and say, what are you doing different here than we are at the other facilities? And I think I have blazed through this much faster than I intended. So I guess if there are questions, or I guess Craig.